Welcome to Transjacked, Victims of the Gender Industry Speak Out. Erin Brewer and Maria Keffler of Advocates Protecting Children talk to people whose lives have been upended by gender ideology activism, including parents, teachers, detransitioners, and others who were exploited by unethical doctors, therapists, schools, and activists. Listen to their stories as they describe the damage being wrought on individuals, families, and society by the gender industry. Welcome to Transjacked, Victims of the Gender Industry Speak Out. I'm Maria Keffler.
I'm Erin Brewer.
Welcome back. We are here today with Michelle, who's going to tell us a little bit about what it's like going through a graduate program and dealing with gender ideology. So Michelle, welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
And can you just tell us a little bit about your program and why it is that you feel you've been transjacked?
Yeah, so it's a master's degree that I'm working towards. I'm towards the end. It's a 3-year program. And at the end of it, we are basically clinical mental health counselors. There are a couple of specialties that you can do. You can either just go the general route, or you could be a school counselor. There are other specialties with addictions, with counseling veterans, but we're all pretty much in the same programs. And then if you do another specialty, for example, school counselors, then you would have, I think, 2 or 3 other classes. I'm in the general one though.
So what has it been like going back to school for this master's degree and encountering gender ideology?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't fully answer your first question. So honestly, when I first started this program, so just to explain a bit, I'm in my early 50s. And so I share that because I think it's important to have that for the context of what I'm going to share. I'm a mother. I have so far, knock on wood, successfully raised 2 children. They're in college. And so when I came into this program, I came into it with also having worked in mental health in some capacity over several years. I've worked with children in different ways, as well as with adults. And so basically, I'm not your average master's student who's, 25 years old. So I'm definitely in the higher age range of this program. And so it's really interesting as we learn everything that we're learning in this program. I do come through with this filter as a mom, as somebody with a few decades experience living on this crazy earth. And so something that really drew me to the school is its emphasis on social justice, because I've always considered myself somebody who kind of really wants to support the underdog in society. So, and I've specifically been interested in working with children, with women in my volunteer work and so on. And so I thought, wow, this is what I'm needing. A lot of times in my work, I have come up against this feeling. Now I know from what I've learned myself, even before starting this program, how much trauma informs the way that we behave in the world, and especially intergenerational and so on. So I thought, this sounds great. Social justice sounds great. What I didn't realize, though, is how the interpretation of social justice is really, it's not the way I had always interpreted it in many ways. And when it comes to the whole gender ideology, I see this too, in that we are not, it's kind of very narrow. So first of all, I never thought of myself as I become a counselor. I thought of myself as being a helper, versus when we're looking at social justice, these programs, is a lot of it is you're not just expected, and I say just in quotes, to meet with a client and help them work through their issues and their pain and their trauma, but we're also encouraged to basically become activists with the client or for them. And I think that for some people that really works, whatever their experience or worldview is. but I feel like for me in this program, um, it's a very, so when we have our so it's online, and so when we have our residencies, which is basically a few days together, either in person if it's not pandemic world, or on Zoom if it is pandemic world. We're recording this in 2022, so I think right now there's hybrid. And so there are these keynote speakers, and a lot of times they are talking about the LGBT. Actually, I don't even know how many. I think the last time I checked in their emails and stuff is LGBTQIA, a couple
Plus,
other
plus.
letters plus. Yeah. Yeah. I actually had to look up what everything was. And so there's really this expectation that whether the presenters are coming from, talking on these issues, that if we don't affirm, then we're basically being bigots. We're contributing to their potential suicidality. And so it's a very narrow view of it. And again, I mentioned I'm a parent. And when I think about it, I've always been somebody who looks at the bigger picture, the long term. And I've also actually really studied this topic for the last 3 years just on my own. And so I'm fully aware of the flawed studies that show that actually when you hold this, you're either going to affirm the child or they might die by suicide. All of those studies are actually extremely flawed. When we look at, in one class, we'll learn all about human development. So what are the different stages that a child and then an adult go through in life? And so we're taught that this is what generally happens for kids at this age, young children, and then as they're teenagers and so on. And then when we're encouraged to affirm, that kind of throws all of that stuff out the window, because now instead of looking at what is really a healthy, normal, fluidity, maybe in sexuality and how we see ourselves gender wise, how we fall into gender roles, how we express ourselves, even in the way we dress and so on. That is a normal part of human development. And yet that kind of goes out the window with the affirm thing. And so I'm, I'm kind of, I always thought of myself as a little bit of a rebellious person. I've always told my kids, if everybody is doing something, it's probably a stupid idea. And so, and so I look at it this way, like, okay, so sort of devil's advocate, what's going on here? And then through my own research, I've learned more about the children who are affirmed are much more likely to then get plugged into the gender clinics, which means the hormones, the medical route. And I've always been, for myself, I'm very into wellness. And I've also been that way with my parenting. I've always thought, why would I want to put something into our bodies for the short-term fix? And so with this thing, I see it the same way. And so but the thing is that we're not encouraged to think critically, and I hate that word critical, because that means, to me, that means that it's being negative, like being self-critical doesn't feel good. So when I think of it more as questioning, so is there a different way, maybe the wait and see approach? But again, if I have a few times I have brought up my concerns, but it's always been in a small group setting, because if I am in a large group, I'm very conscious of the fact that somebody will be offended by this. Somebody will, you know, probably call me out on something and accuse me of being a bigot. Um, and I hate being misinterpreted and misunderstood. And so, I definitely self-edit, but when I'm in small groups, and I have to say, and it depends on who's in that group, we have a lot of professors who are part of the LGBTQ community, and they have a couple of times shared that their own children, 12, 13 years old, are transgender. So the last thing I'm going to do is express my skepticism about these types of approaches. I don't want to get kicked out. And so I've had, anytime I have shared something, somebody, either because of their outright expressing, wow, that's really interesting, they seem genuinely curious, then I will start a sidebar conversation with them, or we'll go offline. And so I've actually made a few friends this way in the program who are actually curious, either really along the lines that I am, or interested in hearing more about what I've learned. But it's ridiculous to me that at this age, in this type of program where, a lot of these people are basically going to be out there as therapists. We already are. We're in our field work. I'm at an internship now. Some people are working toward being school counselors. It's really frightening to me that there's this level of self-censoring on my behalf and some of my classmates, but also just this really sometimes hostile environment. I mean, even if somebody identifies as they, and then in the group you say, yes, and when so and so, blah, 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 and he said blah, 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 a lot of times these people will come in and correct you and just completely interrupt the whole flow of conversation. And so it's interesting that we often are taught about microaggressions, and yet that only goes one way, apparently.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things that I really am curious about, because I have a doctorate degree, so I have some background in interpreting methodology and looking at research, but it's been a really long time. But even still, I can look at the research that they're using to suggest that we must affirm, and it's so bad. There's so many methodological flaws. There are so many holes in it. It's so clearly activist research that shouldn't be used. Can you kind of do you have a sense of how it is that college professors are looking at this research and somehow being willing to look past all those methodological flaws and accept these claims?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. One of them is, I think in the general world right now, we're all kind of siloed. We live in our bubble of, even on Twitter, we edit out, we don't pay attention to what doesn't, confirm our own biases and beliefs. And I think that in academia, I think the people who live in that world are really literally like living in their bubble. And so there were a couple of my classmates that I met with in person once, and then and I liked them. I think they liked me. And so I sent them, at some point, I texted them an article or something related to this. And I said, I hope you read this. In our work, I know you both work in trauma. We're going to come across these topics. And so I would highly encourage you read this, that has this research about, this sort of topic. And then one of them, her reply back to me, she didn't say anything. She just sent me a link to a paper. Now, this is a paper that is frequently shared with us by our program and by the ACA, the American Counseling Association, all of those acronyms, all those groups. They share this paper. So it's basically how to work with LGBT. Yeah, at that point, it's just LGBT. Or maybe, no, it was LGB. I don't think there was T in there yet. Or maybe it's T, I don't know. So anyway, so I opened this and I noticed a couple things. First of all, it was published in 2010. Second of all, and they even said this when in the discussion in the actual paper, they pointed out that one of their limitations was this was just studying adults.
Mm.
And so I went back to this classmate and I said, thank you for sharing this paper. That was really interesting. I have a couple of disagreements with it. One is it was published in 2010. What we know about this, especially now with the younger people, is that a lot of there's this incredibly high rates of young people identifying as being somewhere in this, gender questioning realm, where what we know now, based on Dr. Littman's research and so on, is that there probably is some element of social contagion because these numbers are way higher than they've ever been. In 2010, the iPhone, social media, all that stuff hadn't really taken hold yet. So I think there needs to be more research now into how that factors into these enormous numbers of, before it used to be boys, mostly boys wanting to transition. Now it's mostly girls. And it's at this age where they're on TikTok and all these social media platforms and basically having, being given plenty of information as to why they should hate their bodies. And then on top of it, we now know how many of these kids actually have autism. And so anyway, so I shared all of this in a text message, which is probably not the best route. And so I was basically shut down by both of them. One of them came back and said, I am too busy to deal with this. I am counseling a couple of adults who have whose trauma is very much related to bigotry about their LGBTQ whatever status. And then the other one said, I'm sorry, I don't know much about this, but I'm super liberal, so I probably won't agree with any of this. And
Wow.
that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And I was shocked. These are two women who are middle-aged, they have kids, and yet they didn't. And I understand, and this is something that really is concerning me, not maybe in academia, it's the same, but definitely in therapists who are in the world right now. There is such a high demand for therapy that most therapists I know are either burnt out or on the fast track to burnout, and they don't have the bandwidth to go and do that extra research. And so in defense of them, I get that. And I've actually had some conversations with a couple of my friends who have been therapists for 10, 20 years. And one of them, for example, she had no idea any of this was going on. And so I met with her for lunch. We were just chatting. And then I shared some of this and she was shocked. And she said, please send me more information. And she's been really open to it. But I think that most, we're so busy and we only have so much time. So we tend to just take in information from the usual routes. And I think that that's part of the problem. And then in academia, I really also think that, I mean, honestly, I, to a large degree, I really don't understand it because I don't have a PhD. I don't consider myself a genius. And when I look at this, at the information, when I look at what's going on, I always look, who's ahead of me, as a parent, who's already got their kids, through these stages. What are they doing right? What have they done wrong? Let me pick their brains so that I don't have to make the same mistakes. And I think that that's why I look at what's going on in Europe right now with all of this, with Sweden and England and Finland and France and New Zealand. Well, New Zealand's not in Europe, obviously, but these countries they're way ahead in terms of when they started doing all this affirming and medicalizing this. And now they have said, oh, we got to put the brakes on this. And I think to a large extent because they have, I think most of them have some sort of nationalized medicine. And so there's much more oversight because taxpayers are paying for everything. In the US, we have this huge medical industry that where you are incentivized to have lifelong patients, diabetes, certain cancers. We don't want to cure you. We want to continue this. And I can't help but, and I feel like a conspiracy theorist, which I don't like, but, I sit here and I think, why would the gender industry not be the same as that,
Well,
So,
it is a big question to me when I look at the, just the explosion of kids who are taking on this identity. And in
mhm,
any other case in mental health, if we had such an explosion, there would be alarm bells ringing. People would be, we need research, we need to, put together some task forces, we need to figure this out. In this one case, we're all supposed to just say, oh, this is great, we're going to affirm them and medicalize them for life. And you mentioned earlier that a colleague was working with some patients who were feeling like they were traumatized by bigots. And I wondered if you could address that a little bit, because from my perspective, I'm seeing children taught to be fragile and to be unable to deal with difficulties and to be encouraged to adopt a marginalized identity so that they don't have to take responsibility for life's difficulties. And to me, that's really scary.
yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think in her case, she was probably referring, and this is why I think the whole topic, one of the reasons it's so fraught is because we have LGB and then plus the T. And
And they're
so
different. They're very
they
different
are,
populations. And the
they are.
research that's being used for the T is research that's primarily done with the LGB on adults
Mhm,
just different, completely different populations, and they're trying to
yeah,
apply it. And that's what's so frustrating is that it's like you can't take these two totally different populations
mhm.
and treat them as if they're one when they're categorically different.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I think that because of because heterosexuality in the US has definitely, and a lot of people who are in the LGBT community have really been marginalized in a lot of ways, have been, uh, you know, they've definitely, a lot of them have suffered. I think this particular classmate, her client, she didn't tell me anything about them, but my sense is it was definitely an adult because she hasn't been working with kids in her internship. Um, and the trauma was basically related to being marginalized as I don't know if it was gay or lesbian. So I do think that that is a completely different situation from what we're seeing with the kids, because I mean, just like you said, and this is, I think, with the social justice in general, a lot of what rubs me wrong is how much of this is actually encouraging people to take on a victim identity and to, as a therapist, I aim to build my clients or work with them to build their resilience, because the reality is that life is rough on this, on this earth. And so as a parent, I have never been somebody to, I'm not a helicopter parent. I'm not somebody who clears away for my kids. I don't pick up their mess. Well, sometimes I'll help them fold their laundry, but in life stuff, I don't do that. And so because it's stealing from them the opportunity to learn how to handle adversity. We're going to have adversity through our whole life. So if we have a child who is experiencing some sort of challenge because of who they see themselves being and how they interpret. I mean, I was bullied. I mean, horrifically bullied in middle school. That was horrible. I would not wish that on anyone. And that experience really made me, probably learn how eventually I got to the point where I didn't give a crap what other people thought of me, and maybe that's why I can be here today because I'm here. I did ask you to make me anonymous, put the avatar on my face and so on. And that is really just because I don't want to get kicked out of school or anything. I got to get my degree and then let's see what happens.
Mm.
But I think that just as when you reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to speak here, there was a big part of me that said, oh no, I don't want to do that. That's too hard. But then I thought, If I don't come out here and speak and be courageous, and yes, when you share this, there might be some, disparaging comments, there might be, who knows, but I thought life isn't supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be a clear road. And that's what I want my kids to I want to be the one role modeling for them, that if you believe something, whether it's about yourself, about the world, then and that's important to you, you need to be able to stand on that and speak up. And I always thought that if we don't do that, if we don't speak up for other people who can't speak for themselves, if we don't speak up for what's important to us, then what's the point of even being here? It's and so for children who are basically being, and this is what drives me crazy. If children, they're not stupid, right? And so they hear all of the adults saying, oh my gosh, like if they don't call me by my pronouns and my new name versus my quote unquote dead name, then I'm going to kill myself. Like that's what the adults are telling me. So as a child hearing that, then they're probably like, well, I guess life's not worth living if I don't have the right pronouns and name and all of that. And how is that helpful?
Yeah, you're
And
basically teaching children that they're incapable of surviving themselves if they have
mhm,
difficult feelings. And I can't
yeah,
think of a more damaging message.
right,
But the
right.
fact that you're needing to talk about this anonymously is an indication of the fact that this is not a marginalized group. This is an
Mhm.
incredibly powerful group. People are scared. People are losing their jobs. People are being attacked. People are being deplatformed. And it's because this isn't a marginalized group. It's a group that has
Mhm.
assumed an incredible amount of power. We can see that right now with the White House. You mentioned that you're a mother, and the powers that be would have you called a birthing parent
Oh
because
my gosh. Yeah, don't even that. Well, I don't know if you saw this, but the Merriam-Webster dictionary just changed their definition of woman. Yeah.
Did they define it though? They actually define it?
Well, they say the adult, I think they still have the adult female human
Adult human
being.
female.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then they also added on, or somebody who feels like one.
wow.
Oh, wow. Well,
Oh,
that
Yeah.
completely takes away from the first definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just crazy. Um, I feel like I'm in this huge gaslighting situation.
Mhm.
And now and then when um I have this weird thought that, gosh, if there are any extraterrestrial beings right now looking down at humans, they're probably thinking, what the heck is going on down there? But and that just makes me chuckle, because sometimes I do need to chuckle, because this can make me super cranky. And it's I mean, I have one of my classmates who's like-minded with me on this one. She's in a class right now where they're doing group projects, and it's basically group count facilitating groups. And so she suggested to the other three women in her group, can we do a um, basically design a curriculum. I don't know if it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, how long they were going, but design a curriculum so that we can facilitate a group for parents of gender questioning kids. I mean, she totally went out on a limb by even suggesting that. And the what she got from them was no, because that topic is too political, and no, because there isn't enough information and research into how to conduct such a group. And I was floored by this. I said to her, isn't this what grad school is for, though? I mean, aren't we supposed to learn from each other, broaden our perspectives, dig into the research, and then if there isn't the research, that's a good, trailhead into, well, let's put this into our curriculum, and then that becomes research,
right.
Mhm.
like
And
create a
Yeah.
group and then pilot it.
it's funny that you mentioned being cranky because based on the fact that you chose this particular program based on it having a social justice bent, I feel just this incredible frustration that all of these resources and all of this money is just being poured into this whole transgender ideology, when we do have kids with autism who need special help, when we do have at-risk kids who aren't learning to read and who could really use the funding to help with literacy programs. It seems like all of the money that should be going to help with social justice activities is being poured into what is essentially an identity that somebody can opt into and then claim to be marginalized.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it is frustrating. I saw something the other day about how much I guess that Biden has a foundation, and then that foundation is basically being used to bring in all this curriculum, K through 12 public schools. And I mean, it's really, like I said, it's really hard not to be a conspiracy theorist. Um, and it's really frightening because I can't help but think, I mean, these are the, I guess parents now, ever since the pandemic and being aware more of what's going on in the kids' schools. And so a lot of parents have really started to no longer trust their, public agencies and schools and so on. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next election as a result of that. But it's mind-boggling to me because I sometimes, when I learn about this stuff, I think, first of all, how does anyone think this is good? Second of all, how did it change so quickly? I mean, I feel like it just happened right under my nose, and I'm thinking, was I not paying attention? Was I not following the right people on Twitter? So
Well,
it's
and I
it's
think the reason I became aware of this was because they were passing therapy bans in my state, and I'm not sure if Maria mentioned that I had a trans identity as a child, what would
Mhm.
have been considered a trans identity as a child, and therapy helped me. And I no longer have that identity, and I'm very thankful. So I became aware of this when I read about this therapy ban, and I'm like, I must not be understanding this. There
Mhm.
must be a disconnect here. So I contacted the director of Equality Utah, which is the Utah LGBT advocacy group. And
But
he
and I want to interrupt that you had a very good relationship with that
Oh yeah,
organization.
I was a donor. I
Mhm.
used to, yeah, I mean, I was on their mailing list. And he blocked me, he wouldn't talk to me. And it became clear that indeed they were trying to ban the kind of therapy that helped me as a child, and that the only therapy they wanted to allow was affirmation. And
Wow.
and so how does it go? I mean, that's what's shocking is how quickly it went from sort of, and my theory is that when gay marriage sort of became normalized, when the Supreme Court ruled that it was okay, they had all these resources, all this infrastructure, and they had to direct it somewhere. And somehow the trans activists got in there and appropriated it. That's my theory. But I
Mm.
wanted to ask you how you feel about these therapy bans that are being enacted as you move into this field.
Again, terrifying. I mean, I have I've spoken with a couple of therapists who are out there and practicing, and they definitely are very concerned about what is now being called conversion therapy. Because I don't think most people are aware of this. Mostly when you hear conversion therapy, you think of the original intent of that, which was, these horrible situations where these kids were taken off to wilderness camp to basically force them into not being gay.
Or
And
electrocuted or given
yeah,
ipecac
yeah,
or beaten or forced to watch pornography and then being
hmm,
tortured. I mean, all kinds of
yeah.
um when I started asking people, so what do you think this ban is about? That's inevitably what they said.
Mhm.
They had no idea that these bans would prevent therapists from looking at underlying issues related to
Right.
gender identity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible. And the thing is, like, even I have a class right now that's basically related, it's sex counseling. And so I was looking at one of the things that I had to read, and it actually said it had a chart that listed, so if you say this, then this is a microaggression. If you say this, it's a micro assault, and so on. And so, yeah,
Wow.
I
So we have
know.
micro assaults now,
Yes, we do.
actual
I'm gonna see if I
violence. Wow.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. And so the micro, let's see if I can pull it up here. I don't know if I have it available. I don't right now, but basically it was, if I ask somebody, is there trauma? Say somebody is coming in for, I guess, something transgender related, and then it is completely normal as a therapist to say, can you tell me, do you have any trauma in your background? No. If they have told me they're transgender, and then I soon thereafter say, so is there trauma, that is a micro assault.
Wow.
And so I think
I mean,
it's
talk
gotten,
about Orwellian. Like,
I know, I
Well,
know.
you're not allowed to help them.
Mhm.
Even if, you separate those two things, like, okay, you're transgender. Is there anything else that you need help with? No, you're not allowed to go there. You're not allowed
Right.
to help
Well,
them.
because the ideology says that pursuing the identity of transgender will heal all. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering, how are we going to help these kids who in, 3, 4, or 5 years realize that they've been completely betrayed by their authority figures who've told them that, going down this medicalized route of having a transgender identity is going to solve all their problems, and they realize that in fact it's not solved all their problems and given them more problems.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you mentioned autism. There's also eating disorders are a common comorbidity, and if you think about, I mean, I think it makes sense. You're not happy with your body. There might be other circumstances in your life. Maybe you were abused. Maybe your parents are in high degree of conflict or in a messy divorce. Maybe you're being bullied at school. Whatever is going on, you feel socially awkward. You bring your focus to your body, because that's, what a lot of times that is the only thing that feels to a child like, this I can control. And
Mm.
so it makes sense that actually a lot of the kids um, with gender dysphoria of some kind, gender questioning, are also experiencing body image issues and eating disorders. But then if you, and this is where I have one of these cognitive dissonances, because I'm thinking, I would never say to a child who is obviously, underweight or whatever, like they have an eating disorder, I would never say, oh yeah, you know what, let's go do the Atkins diet, like that might work for you, and maybe you should just run a few miles every day. No. So why would I, if I'm not going to affirm their eating disorder voice, that part of them that says this is completely wrong about me, why would I say, no, we're not going to affirm that voice, but we are going to affirm, the other voice. And so, and this is one of the things that I find, so I was doing some research, because I don't know if you've heard of internal family systems, IFS. It's a type of therapy that I really love. It's very compassionate, and it's also very effective. And it basically, in a really quick nutshell, we all have different parts of ourselves. There might be a part of you that absolutely loves doing this podcast, and then there might be a part of you that really just wants to hide under the covers and never talk to anybody and eat donuts. So we have all these different parts, um, and so I've taken a bunch of IFS workshops and so on. My own therapist several years ago used it on me very effectively, and that's when I became intrigued with it. And so I was thinking, I wonder if anyone's done any research into using IFS with gender dysphoria, because it would make sense that somebody might have a part that it's it's very effective, by the way, for depression, for dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, even schizophrenia. I mean, it works with substance use, with eating disorders. And so I thought, I wonder if anybody's done any research into how to work with this part that feels like I I'm definitely in the wrong body. Maybe it's a bit dissociative. And so I looked into it. Nobody has done any research in it. And I mean, it's shocking to me because to me it seems so obvious. And so I reached out to a couple of my friends who are therapists and they do IFS. And I asked them, I said, what do you think of this theory? And they said, that makes total sense to me. And I'm like, right? And um, so anyway, so I just feel like there's so much else that we could be doing instead of just this affirmative model. But I feel like it's probably one of those things that is so scary because you might lose your license as a therapist. You probably won't get a job at a university. I mean, look at Dr. Littman. She wasn't, her contract was not renewed at Brown University. Um, so anyone who's daring to think this way, I've heard of a lot of therapists leaving the profession and instead becoming coaches.
Mhm.
So,
And
so
you
yeah.
mentioned that, we all have different parts to us. And I think that I feel like kids are getting such a convoluted message about what it's like to be a normal person. They're
Mhm.
getting a message that all women are completely ecstatic when they menstruate, and that we're all very comfortable with our bodies, and that
Mhm.
um, we're all integrated. Like you said, I think most of us have different aspects of ourselves. Some of us
Mhm.
are dissociative, and these kids are getting the message that if they have any of this, it's an indication that they're born in the wrong body, rather than this is pretty much normal. This is pretty
Mhm.
much what most people deal with. I mean, I suppose there could be one or two people out there in the world that's completely content with themselves and fully integrated, um, and doesn't have any issues, but I haven't met one.
No. You know what? I would be really concerned if I met somebody like that. And I would be really concerned if I met somebody who loved middle school. I mean, that's
Yes.
concerning to me, right?
Whenever I'm speaking to a group, I always ask who here really enjoyed middle school. And there's usually one or two people in a room of 200 who raise their hands. And I'm like, you're punking me. You're punking
Mhm.
me. Nobody loved middle school. But then somebody else said to me, oh, that one was probably the bully. That was probably the one who bullied
Oh,
everybody else.
I do think there's like 1 or 2%. They were the ones who were picking on us.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, either that or they did middle school on an island somewhere. I don't,
Mm,
they surfed every day.
Either
yeah.
that or they hated high school. I mean, if you can make it
Mhm.
through elementary
Right.
all the way to high school and you're ecstatic at every
Yeah.
phase,
Yeah.
that's pretty miraculous. And
Right.
like you said, maybe they were homeschooled or on an island or something. But
Mhm.
that's what is really disturbing to me, is that these kids are getting this very convoluted message about what it's like to be human.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's our culture in general. I mean, I before getting into all of this, I used to work at a couple of substance use disorder addiction facilities, rehabs. And so I've been really interested probably since about the year 2000, really interested in what I became at that time. I became really aware of how many people were addicted to heroin. And so ever since then, you might have seen or read the book Dope Sick. But the way that we went with basically taking pain and making that a fifth vital sign, and then all of these doctors would be evaluated based on how their patients decided that they had treated their pain. And so we have this culture where we shy away from any discomfort. Childbirth is supposed to hurt, having your wisdom teeth out is supposed to be uncomfortable for a couple days. And still to this day, my kids just had theirs out in the last couple of years, and their oral surgeon was basically shaming me because I refused to fill the prescription for opiates. And I'm like, are you kidding me in this day and age? And even my kids were shocked. They're like, we don't want that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's
but I
interesting you
think,
mentioned that, because I just read a book about how big pharmaceutical companies basically developed standards of care for pain and then
mhm,
flooded the market. And I'm like, boy,
yep.
that sounds really familiar.
Yes, it is. I'm telling you, once you learn about the whole opiate epidemic, where it started and how it's continuing, there are so many parallels with this, which is probably another reason why I'm so obsessed with this whole topic. Because back when I heard in 2000, I was working out in a gym it was in, I don't know, mid morning. There were a bunch of cops who had just come off their shift, and I was lifting weights with them, and they would tell me what they were seeing. And so I would come home and tell my neighbors, you got to watch out, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what are you talking about? My kid would never do that. And I feel like I'm seeing this all over again with this. I mean, it's a little different in that the kids, I think, who are being brought into this do tend to be the kids, like I said, with autism, are probably not the majority of the children. Whereas I feel like drugs can definitely just hit a really wide spectrum of people. And especially when it's, you least expect it, like your doctor gives you something because you had surgery, because you're an athlete and so on. So it is different.
It concerns me, though, that with this issue, even if the kids aren't getting sucked into it themselves, they're being taught to affirm it. They're being taught to agree with it. We're all being forced down this really destructive path. And so I'm wondering, as these kids, as Erin brought up, in 3, 4, 5 years, I think we're going to have just an explosion of kids recognizing what's happened to them. Who are they going to land with? Like, who's going to be there to help them when all of their peers are saying, no, there's no such thing as detransitioning? We've talked to detransitioners who people say, oh, well, then you were never really trans. And Erin,
Mm.
you've heard that yourself.
Well,
Where's
there was
the
just an article
support?
written about a young woman who was recovering from having a double mastectomy with her roommates. And because she wasn't willing to admit she was sexually attracted to one of her roommates because of his sex, she was shamed and kicked out of her housing while she was still recovering from surgery because she had, challenged the ideology. And that's what's so scary, is that it's like you have to buy into this 100%, or else you get completely ostracized from your peer groups. And
Mhm.
so how do kids navigate? Because we've talked to other detransitioners who say, yeah, I kind of knew I'd made a mistake, but I was afraid to tell anybody because I'd convinced everybody that I was this other thing. And then when I realized it was a mistake, I was too embarrassed to admit it. And there are
Mhm.
all sorts of issues that therapists like you are going to have to grapple with.
Well, and the thing is that for kids especially, I feel like, first of all, for them to be really adamant about something to the point where they're causing a lot of conflict in the family and so on, it's got to be so hard for them when if there's a part of them that says, maybe this isn't right. It's really hard to have that much sense of self and courage to then admit, you know what, I was wrong.
Mhm.
And it's like and I know that, that if, as a parent, if your child is really adamant that they absolutely hate broccoli, but then they try it at somebody else's house, they're not going to easily come home and say, hey mom, I actually like broccoli, when they resisted it for a couple of years. And so I feel like this is the same thing where we're, I think it would be lovely if there was a place for these, you know, children, adults, whatever age, to feel that there's a sense of grace where they're allowed to say, um, I've changed my mind, and so, because that's the thing, is we're as we this is such a fluid thing, like I said before, sexuality, gender identity, it has always been a fluid thing. And the problem with where we are now with this cultish, sense, this ideology as well, and then marry that with social media. Whenever I see a mother post something on social media announcing that her 5-year-old is now a girl, or 10-year-old is now a girl, and yay you, and I just cringe, because I think this might have been a little bit of a pit stop for your child, but now you are creating a landing pad, and I don't know how they can gracefully come out of it. And I get why you did it. You probably, my heart goes out to parents who are experiencing this in their family, because it's got to be so hard to know, what do I do? especially if it's a parent that literally has been blindsided and that has to now learn everything, the language and all that, and go through these very, very murky waters of finding support. And so I really, my heart goes out to them. And so I just see that a lot of them say, okay, this is what I need to do to avoid suicide or whatever the fear is. And also, they probably don't know there are other options because, like we've said, most therapists who would be willing to do this are probably not out there advertising their services as being non-gender affirming, but rather,
And I
let's
think,
wait and
yeah,
see.
you really hit on it, that these parents have been convinced that their children are going to kill themselves. I
Mhm,
see that. I mean, it's just this common mantra.
mhm,
Do you want a dead son or a live daughter? Do you want a dead
right.
daughter, live son? Um, that dead name, using a child's dead name is causing suicide, that
Mhm,
using appropriate pronouns is, or using chosen pronouns is suicide prevention. I mean, it's just the way they are manipulating suicide is to me, it's so scary, because in the research that I've done about suicide, the more we normalize suicide as an option, the more likely children will be to take it,
mhm.
just because we're normalizing it, not
And
because. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Maria.
see it. I'm sorry. I see it spreading even just beyond this issue. I have a friend, I have more than one friend whose teenage daughter is dealing with eating disorders. And I was talking with one who I'm very close with, and I said, you've got to get the social media. You've got to take the social media away, take the phone away. And she
Mhm,
was adamant, oh, we can't, we can't. We tried to do that, and our daughter got suicidal. We can't, we can't. And
mhm,
like, she's suicidal because she's getting coached, on in the pro
mhm,
Anna and the pro bulimia groups.
Mhm.
And I couldn't get through to her. Like, she's like, no, Marie, you don't know how bad it was. We can't do that. We can't take it away.
mm.
So parents
Yeah,
have been really, cut off. Their ability to parent has been,
yeah.
undermined by this narrative, because that is one of the scariest things as a parent, to
Mhm.
confront the idea.
Mhm,
And so I don't. I mean, it's important to get the message out there that this is emotional manipulation in any other relationships.
Mhm.
If you have a parent who says, you better come visit me, and bring me groceries every week, or I'm going to kill myself, we sort of think like, oh, that
mhm,
person probably needs some help. Or if
mhm.
our spouse says, if you don't let me drive your car to work, I'm going to kill myself. We recognize that as emotional manipulation, but for some reason in this case, we're completely, enabling it. And
Mhm.
I'm guessing that's not anything that's addressed in your
Oh
field of
gosh, no.
study.
No, I mean it's and the thing is what I've learned about grad school is we're learning basic skills, counseling skills and so on, but the expectation is you get your degree and then you learn the more specific stuff with your CEUs, your continuing education units that you have to do every year to keep your license. And so with this, it's more um and this cracked me up when we did the whole research class. How do you determine whether or not research is valid and reliable? And I'm sitting here thinking, well, okay, I could rock the boat here and bring in some of this, the suicide things. And then I thought, yeah, I really want to get an A. I want to keep my 4.0. I'm not going to be doing that. But so it's I think so. Even like I had a small group at one point and we had to watch a video, a vignette, and the situation was a girl suddenly announced to her parents that she now identified as a boy. And so the it was probably a 5-minute vignette, and then there were maybe 6 of us in the group, and then we had to talk about it. So as usual, I just sat back and listened to everybody else talk, and then I chimed in and I said, everybody was saying the dad is terrible. He's just not accepting and blah blah. And so I said, so can we just for a moment consider the dad's perspective here? For all we know, we haven't seen the girl's life before, but the parents are really shocked by this. And that tells me she's probably never before um, shown any, outward appearance of wanting to be a boy. So this is new to them. And so I said, I'd be curious to know how much time she spends on social media and what she's looking at there. And so it was interesting. My classmates said, "Oh, social media, why?" And so I explained to them, and I explained to them this, the rapid uptick and how many girls are now questioning their gender and all of that. And this was news to them. They had no idea.
And
Wow.
this is in a graduate counseling program.
Correct.
I just want to emphasize that for people. You are at ground zero for who is going to be on the front line of helping these kids, helping these people. And you guys are not learning anything about this except you have to affirm, you have to affirm, you have to affirm.
Correct.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the same in teachers' colleges,
Mhm.
and other professions where, at the university level, even at, in conservative states, the universities are just infiltrating all the programs with this message, that you have to affirm, that you can't question. And I think a lot of people are just kind of hoping it will go away, and it may, or it may not. When I see what's happening, within our government, I am appalled that we're taking away words like mother and daughter, and that breastfeeding is now chest feeding, and even organizations like La Leche League and Amnesty International that I used to donate to and feel very good about have bought into this ideology. It's as Maria said, it's terrifying.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's so weird. I mean, even medical schools,
Mhm.
Mhm.
they have this whole, um, I guess, social justice approach where not only are they doing, talking about birthing parents and so on, or birthing humans, or I don't know, birthing people, but even in other areas, prioritizing care for the what would be considered, I guess, the minorities,
Mhm.
more marginalized people
Mhm.
over others, and it's very concerning for sure.
Mhm.
And even the acceptance rate, I have a friend who applied to medical school, and
Mm,
this is a mainstream medical school. And she said in the pull down menu under gender, there were about 30 options that she could
mm,
choose. And she
mm,
said, I knew as soon as I indicated that I was, not somehow marginalized, I wasn't going to get into the program. She just
mm,
felt completely defeated because even being accepted into the program relies on, and I've had some experience with that when I worked at the university, that people would get scholarships based on an identity rather than
mm,
on qualifications. So it really is, it's like the entire society has been um, taken over by this ideology,
mhm,
and we need more people like you speaking out, and I have a feeling that once you're out of school, that you'll be able to work with those who are struggling with this issue in a way that is reasonable and that doesn't encourage the dissociative thought process,
mm.
and is really helpful to them. We just need more like you.
Well,
Oh.
we get calls and emails all the time from parents who are looking for good therapists. They're looking for ethical therapists who are going to give them, their kids, their families appropriate care. And I mean, we've stopped trying to help people find therapists, partly because of liability issues, but partly because all of our therapists are full up. They
Yeah.
all tell us we
Yeah.
can't take anybody else. So yeah, people are desperate for help. They're looking for help. We have a book out for parents to help parents whose children have adopted this trans identity, to help them get them out of this cult. And we sell 4 or 5 copies of that book every single day, and we have for a year, over a year, almost a year and a half now. And so there are lots of parents out there who recognize the harms of this and are looking for help. So I just want to encourage you. I think you're going to have a lot of work available to
Mm.
you when you finish your program. And we're just so grateful that you're supporting people in ethical and healthy and realistic ways.
And I think that
Oh,
gentle nudging that you're doing is really important. Just
mhm,
questioning, because so many people don't realize they're even allowed to do that. I think
Mm.
that really helps. And I was wondering, as we finish up here, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
um, I guess there's well, so as I've been thinking about all of this and again wondering what is going on, am I crazy here? And so I was thinking about how these graduate programs, so in order for them to be, they have to be accredited by ACREP, which is I don't even know what it is, like a governing accreditation, whatever program. And so they have to meet certain expectations and objectives and blah blah blah. They in order to do that, and then so any legitimate counseling program is going to want to be ACREP accredited. And so I can't help but wonder between that, between the American Counseling Association, all of these organizations that basically have to do with licensing, have to do with um, they're basically associations that most quote unquote legitimate therapists join and so on. So I have to think that these organizations that are pushing this affirmation model, I don't think they I have never been asked as a member of ACA what I think about this. And
Mhm.
so when they go out and they push these emails and they put these things on their website and so on, saying this is what we are, telling therapists to do, like you have to do this, that, and the other. Um, I want to think that they are not reflecting the entire membership because they're not polling them.
Mhm.
And so I do wonder, maybe one way to start changing is if people get more involved in, that's not for me, that's not my wheelhouse, I don't do that, but for anyone listening, maybe to get involved in the leadership in these organizations, or at least to write to them and question them and say, where is this coming from? Do you, and then they'll probably, it becomes this infinite loop, because then they'll say, so this is based on the Trevor Project, what they're putting out. And then the Trevor Project's thing is based on what, this other organization is putting out. So it's like you go down this huge rabbit hole, and they're probably hoping, just like companies who charge you $20 that you never actually spent, but you really don't have time to go and try to figure out all of the automated system on their phone to actually get your refund, so you just say, oh, it's just $20. I'm sure they're doing the same thing with this. Like, nobody can be bothered. The doctors who were told Oxycontin is not addictive, they never actually went and looked up that quote unquote study, which it turns out now is bogus.
Mm.
So that's one thing. And then the other thing I was going to ask is, if anybody who's listening to this, if they're either in grad school or they're already a therapist and they're um, any of this resonates, I would um, I would love to know that there are other people who feel this way. I don't know if there are private Facebook groups related to this for people, practitioners. I don't know if there's
It might be
some
worth
kind of
starting
community.
something like that, just so that
Mm.
there's a community where you don't feel like you're crazy.
Yeah.
The concern that I've had, and that, anytime Maria and I have approached professionals to see if we could put together a list of therapists that we could refer people to, they're scared because they don't want to be identified. So it would have to somehow
Yeah.
be anonymous.
Mm.
But maybe we can help facilitate that if people, if there are therapists out there watching this, or people in school who are getting their degrees, contact us, and maybe we can set up a forum or something, that a way for you
Mhm.
all to meet anonymously and move forward as a collective.
And we'll put that
Yeah.
information in the information under the video, how you can reach out to us if you want to
Okay.
contact Michelle, or yeah, advocatesprotectingchildren.org and advocatesprotectingchildren@gmail.com.
And I think that's really helpful, because I remember when I first sort of had the realization of what was happening, I was all by myself. I didn't know anybody else who was concerned, and I thought I was going crazy,
Mhm.
because this all seems so bizarre and unhinged. And once I started meeting other people, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. And so I'm sure that it's very scary to feel like you're the only one seeing something really horrific that's happening. And the
Mhm.
more you can connect with others and have those reality checks, I think, and support each other in speaking out and fighting back. I think that's super important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that it's a shame that to do so, I, people who don't, like my classmates, they probably think I'm a bigot, and so, and it's really a shame that because I set a word at the beginning of each year. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have a word for this year, and my word for this year for myself was nuance.
Mm.
Lean into the nuance, really focus on the nuance. And I feel like this is something that it's so important to do that. And nobody, at least most people, aren't really doing that. You're either with me or against me. And I hope that as we go forward in this, and especially your podcast is amazing for engendering this kind of conversation. I hope that as we go forward, we can maybe um, set the intention as we engage in these conversations with other people of giving people the benefit of the doubt that we really are all doing our best with the resources we have, the information that we have, and can we just be curious about other people's perspective?
I think
That's
that's
a
a great
great,
place to end. That's a really great sentiment. Thank you so
yeah.
much for being willing to speak with us and share your experience.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all that you do. You're amazing. Your books are amazing. So thank you.